This day, set aside to reflect on and honor our mothers. We, of course, owe our existence to the woman who carried us into this world. Beyond that, the complex interplay between ourselves, our mothers, and our fathers are a vital part of what shaped us into the people we are today. It is right that we set aside time to reflect on the love, effort, and sacrifice that we were given. Those of us who have the gift of children better understand what it took for our mothers to raise us. Let us be humbly grateful for this gift of love. Our chalice lighting is from Claudine Oliva. We light this chalice for mothers and mothering, to celebrate those who have taken on the task of nurturing a young one, baby, child, or youth into adulthood. To celebrate those who have nourished the light of truth and compassion in growing minds and hearts. To celebrate those who have committed time, money, energy to the growth of others in this world. We light this chalice to celebrate and hold dear this flame of love.
Throughout the year, we hold classes for newcomers to learn about our history and our church and find ways to get involved. And I am glad that we're able to welcome some new members this morning. Terry at the 9 o'clock. Now I invite Mary Ann and Juliet and Colleen up this morning. Come on forward. When we welcome new members, it's a seemingly simple act of putting pen to paper, signing a name, saying welcome, signing over your soul to the church. Yet and still, something more beautiful happens than that. It's a commitment of hearts to hearts, of joining a community, reconsecrating our shared commitment to our shared values, of naming and honoring new souls among us in this larger family of all souls. I want you to know that this church is a home for your soul, that these here are your people, and also those at the 9 o'clock service and other times too are your people. And together in forgiveness and in grace and strength and resilience, we make here a home at our best for all souls. I invite the congregation in your order of service. There's a litany of welcome, but before that, we're going to invite these new members to say a word.
Hi, I'm Colleen Murphy. I've lived in Rochester for about a year and a half. I moved down from Bloomington to be close to my son's family. And I was tired of taking care of a 3-level townhouse. I was raised Catholic with a Catholic mother, agnostic father, Catholic school through 8 years, public high school, which was my choice, one grandfather who was very, very religious. He had been a convert from Lutheranism. The other grandfather was agnostic and said, don't believe all that stuff they tell you in church. So I tend to lean more towards that side. And I left that church early 20s, had a lot of searching, found a temporary home in New Jersey. Then I moved here, and for 19 years in Minneapolis, I kind of off and on looked, didn't find anything. When I moved down here, one of the first people I met was Jean Hansen, who was a college friend of one of my high school friends, and arranged for us to meet. And as she invited me to do things like demonstrate at Peace Plaza and go to movies at the film festival and plays, everybody she introduced me to was a UU. And started using that term all the time. And then I started coming to services, and several sermons moved me to tears. And I thought, well, I think I found my home. This feels right. So thank you all.
Thanks, Colleen.
My printer died this morning, so I'm using my rough draft. Good morning.
Here, hold on 1 second. It's a magic step.
I love this. It's like being on Johnny Carson. I couldn't wait to be confirmed in my large, liberal congregational church. I couldn't wait to marry the bright, dedicated young man I met at that church and support him in his call to ministry. I couldn't wait to be active in the churches he served. I couldn't wait to read the next book on biblical scholarship or attend the next Jesus seminar. And then I began waiting to see if any of the churches we served were open to exploring a non-literal explanation and examination of the Scripture. And I waited to see if mainline American Protestant churches were ever going to theologically at least move into the 20th century. And I waited, while being told that my beliefs were not Christian and that ministers' wives were not allowed to attend another church. I've waited long enough. I can't wait to join with you and blend my journey with yours into a sacred and caring future.
Most of my career, I made my living by writing, so today I wanted to find the perfect quote. This is a big day for me. I wanted to find the perfect quote to describe how wonderful it feels to join this church. So I looked through some Emerson and some Hawthorne and some Dickinson and those individuals. I couldn't find anything. So then I went online and I found some UU scholars, and I kind of breezed through their material, I have to tell you. I even went back and listened to some of Reverend Luke's past sermons. And
Nothing there.
I still couldn't, but they were all good. They were all good. In fact, as you know, they were stellar, but I still couldn't find anything. So after exhausting those resources, I turned to the next best thing, and that was Steven Spielberg. Pretty sure he wasn't a UU. But this line from The Extraterrestrial, E.T., The Extraterrestrial, most of you, I hope, have seen it. This is Elliot, the little boy, and he's talking to E.T., and he's actually hugging him. So if you'll play along with me, you are my Elliot today. So Elliot says, "You could stay here. You'd be happy here. I would take care of you. I wouldn't let anyone hurt you. We could grow up together." And I thought, well, that's exactly how I feel. I'm happy here, and I feel very cared for. So I thought, I don't need to look any further. That's the quote. So thank you so much for asking me to stay. You didn't even have to bribe me with M&Ms. I still want to stay. And I just want to say I look forward to growing up with all of you.
I invite you to turn now to that litany of welcome as we welcome these new members. First, the congregation speaks. We welcome you into this congregation and into the larger circle of Unitarian Universalism. We welcome your story, your identity, and the gifts that you bring. May you find here a home for your soul and new members.
We gladly join with you as members of this church. We will offer our gifts as we are able to the flourishing and well-being of this community and support the values of this congregation: hospitality, compassion, spiritual growth, and justice.
And all together, we covenant to travel together in this religious community. Here may we be affirmed for who we are and challenged to be our best selves. Here may we grow our souls, care for each other and the earth, nurture spiritual growth, practice justice, and together lead lives of meaning, service, and love. We bid you welcome, and as this congregation sings a blessing to you, and as you sign the membership book, I invite you to be mindful of the 150 years of names that precede you, and be mindful of the many lines after you, knowing that you join in a long line of folks who have found here a home for their soul. And may we keep our doors open so that we are always welcoming those who are looking for this place. We'll sing hymn number 1. It's in your gray hymnal. Prayer for this house, or may nothing evil cross this door. We'll sing verses 2 and 4 together.
I have 2 readings for you this morning. Both of them are excerpts from In Search of a Mother's Garden by Alice Walker. A definition, womanist. 1, a black feminist or feminist of color. From the black folk expressions of mothers to female children, you acted womanish, i.e. like a woman, usually referring to outrageous, audacious, courageous, or willful behavior. Wanting to know more and in greater depth than is considered good for one. Interested in grown-up doings. Acting grown-up, being grown-up. Interchangeable with another black folk expression, you trying to be grown. Responsible, in charge, serious. 2, loves music, loves dance, loves the moon, love the spirit, loves love and food and roundness, loves struggle, loves the folk, loves herself, regardless. 3, womanist is to feminist as purple is to lavender. In the second excerpt, they were women then, my mama's generation, husky of voice and stout of step, with fists as well as hands. How they battered down doors and ironed starched white shirts. How they led armies, had rag generals across minefields, booby-trapped kitchens to discover books, desks, a place for us. How they knew what we must know without knowing a page of it themselves.
It's hard to imagine, isn't it? Hard to imagine something before it comes to be. It's hard to imagine the dream of something that is not yet. And even harder yet to imagine something that has never had the chance, the possibility to be realized. It's hard to imagine the love song dreamed for your life before you were born. Sometimes the kind of curiosity that can spark imagination and wonder begins with some of the most basic questions in life, trying to piece together this world, trying to make sense of things as we all do. These questions of simply trying to figure it all out, trying to understand how things happen a certain way, how things fit together. It's like weaving together some thread to create a fabric, or as Annie Dillard speaks of it, piecing together a net to catch our days. Not too long ago, a young child asked a very curious, practical question. It wasn't particularly magical, but it was filled with curiosity and wonder. She said, "Where do school buses go during the day?" That's a great question. I hadn't been thinking about that question recently. Imagine it as a child. You see these giant yellow things rolling around on the streets, larger than most things you know. They're compelling, they're easy to notice, they're wondrous in some ways. You have toys of them, perhaps you see them constantly in pictures or in books. And once you get to school and you get to see them up close and smell them, which isn't always great, and then you get to ride them. Now that's a good day. The answer wasn't too hard in this situation. They go back to the garage, or they go to other schools with different hours, or they take kids on field trips, or to games, or concerts, or conferences. The child asked then, do they ever go to the bus driver's house? And then I realized the whole point of this question was that this child wanted to become a bus driver so that their own personal car could be a school bus when they grow up. I have to admit, that'd be kind of cool. Sometimes these curious questions about life and the world are fairly easy, just to piece things together. And then sometimes there are other questions coming from that same point of curiosity and wonderment that are practical, just trying to piece this world together, that are very hard to answer. Just this week, I've been hearing some questions that children have had on social media or online in the news, held by children, this is what struck me, at the same age or a similar age as the one wondering about school buses. Questions about how to hide if someone dangerous enters your school. And the more haunting question, why can't we fix this? It reminded me of Nelson Mandela's phrase, there can be no keener revelation of a society's soul than how it treats its children. And there are other hard questions, like I heard a story on the radio this week, maybe you heard it too, between a very young child and their mother. The young child asked a mother about an image that they had seen on the news of a protest and signs that said Black Lives Matter. And the conversation began with the question of a child, what does that mean? They said. And in a world where this white child rarely has had to engage any topics related to experienced racism or oppression, and a white parent who has rarely had to bring up such topics, she decided to take a breath and began a conversation that she was unsure of its impact, but knew it was the right thing to do, and decided honesty was important. She said, because there are some police officers who get too rough with people, and those people get hurt, and I don't know why, but most of the time the people that get hurt have brown or black skin. Why? The child responds. I don't know, replies the mother. But there are young people and there are grown-ups and there are some police officers trying to make sure that that doesn't happen, that people's lives are important, and especially those with black and brown skin who seem to get hurt the most. Later on, the child asked if any of these people who get roughed up ever die. And she simply said, sometimes, yes. And the child said, that's not fair. And the mother replied with the only answer possible, I know. Those are very hard questions and very hard answers. Sometimes that same place of curiosity, those practical questions of putting the world together, bring really hard questions about our humanity, about our shared life, about our history and why things are the way they are, and discerning as a parent or as a mentor or a teacher or just a community member or family member when to tell children what about the world. It makes us wonder about our own piecing together of the world, our own ability to answer things that are hard to answer. Alice Walker wrote these questions and answers about the experience of Black women in this country in her own family and a larger sense of ancestors and lineage. She asked these questions. Who were these saints, these women? She answered, some of them without a doubt were our mothers and grandmothers, exquisite butterflies that were trapped in evil honey in a post-Reconstruction South, toiling away their lives in an era, a century that did not acknowledge them except as the mule of the world. She said they dreamed dreams that no one knew, not even themselves, and saw visions no one could understand. Our mothers and grandmothers, some of them moving to music not yet written. Then she asked, what did it mean to be an artist in our grandmother's time, in our great-grandmother's day? It's a question with an answer cruel enough to stop the blood, she writes. She asked, how was the creativity kept alive? Year after year, century after century, when for most of the years black people have been in America, it was a punishable crime to learn for a black person to read or write. She continued, the freedom to paint, to sculpt, to expand the mind did not exist. Consider, she says, if you can bear to imagine it, what might have been the result if singing, too, were forbidden by law. Listen to the voices of Bessie Smith, Billie Holiday, Nina Simone, Roberta Flack, Aretha Franklin, among others, and imagine, she says, those voices muzzled for life. The agony of the lives of women who might have been poets, essayists, novelists, short story writers, who died with their gifts stifled within them. She says, but this is not the end of the story. Our mothers and grandmothers ourselves have not perished in the wilderness. We must pull out of ourselves and look at and identify with our lives the living creativity that some of our great-grandmothers were never allowed to know. Finally, she said, and so our mothers and grandmothers have, more often than not anonymously, handed on the creative spark, the seed of the flower they themselves never hoped to see, like a sealed letter that they could not plainly read. The seed of the flower, she writes, they themselves never hoped to see. In our tradition in Unitarian Universalism, we have had a hard history, if we know our history, and ask questions. In how we have built or not built the beloved community, how we have fallen short of helping to dismantle racism, how we have sometimes contributed to the structures that put limits on people's humanity. In the mid-1960s, large sums of money were promised from our national association to support the lives and struggles and the identities of Unitarian Universalists of color to a collective within our movement called the Black Affairs Council. In one of the hardest and the longest damning moments of our movement, the money that was promised was never given. There were many excuses given, many complex reasons, but no resolution. And the fact remained it created a rift among various groups in our movement, which you can read about in books on the subject from our library or from my own office. It created anger and resentment and wounds, some of which never healed, some of which we live with today in our movement in known and unknown ways, in the midst of the larger context yet and still of white supremacy in our culture, which is a basic prevalence in our society rooted in a history of normalizing white people's perspective, privilege, culture, and way of life. And then in conscious and unconscious ways, those biases and structures become part of our daily lives, where the stories and the experiences and the cultural traditions of brown and black people are discounted or ignored. It can be a hard thing to discuss, to piece it all together, to try to know how and why things are the way they are. Often we like to think in liberal, progressive communities that the problem is elsewhere. It's out there. But we are part of a larger system and structure, and we are no less guilty. It can be hard to piece this all together with what is happening in our wider society. Why hate speech and racist language from violent white supremacists is on the rise because of the sheer void of morality from our highest office. And even in the seemingly subtle ways, such as why the polls for the Democratic field for president is led strongly by two white men, one of whom was leading in the polls far before he even declared his public campaign. Now, there may be complex reasons for this, but is it not worth the question? Are they automatically, subconsciously more trustworthy, credible, successful, accomplished? And if so, why is that? Or why do we think that is? Because that's not necessarily true. Having a spirit, even a religious practice of curiosity, is to just wonder a little bit, at least, about why that is, to wonder a little bit about our gut responses to explain it away, Maybe, if anything, our spirituality teaches us it's good to take a little breath, a little pause to think and wonder and stay open to what we might have yet to learn as a society, as communities, as individuals. I know I have a lot to learn. I'm reminded of that every day. Our congregation has been invited to join a campaign in our larger association in some ways and in some of the language around it to offer reparations for the sins of our movement by failing to fulfill that promise in the 1960s, and also to continue our work and commitment to racial justice and healing by joining a $5 million campaign, no strings attached, to support the work of Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism, or BLUE, which you may have read in the e-news this past week. You can go back and read it or contact the office for more information. But it's no strings attached because our commitment is rooted in a perspective that reparations are about trust in an organization led by and focusing on the support of Unitarian Universalists of color. Today we'll collect our offering for this work. BLUE creates spaces that help break down limitations on humanity, to highlight and celebrate the voices that have long been in our world and sometimes in our association, in the words of Alice Walker, muzzled, or at least ignored, passed by. BLUE is a prophetic and pluralistic collective and home where the lives and the stories, the gifts, the identities, the spiritualities of Black, Brown, Indigenous, Unitarian Universalists of color are supported. It's done in a variety of ways through conferences and trainings, gatherings for youth and adults, times for connection and conversation and spiritual nourishment, finding a home within this hard, harsh world, and sometimes within a tradition that has a tangled, hard history. Perhaps our hope is that all people might have spaces and mentors and teachers and generations or grandmothers that are liberated, so that our collective identity can move to the music that was not yet written for them, and to imagine what music is yet to be written for those who come after us. Maybe it's providing spaces in our world and our society like these, described in this poem by Yanada Petrus, who writes, "Could we please give the police departments to the grandmothers?" This is her poem. She says, "Give them the city vehicles. Make them a fleet of vintage Corvettes, Jaguars, and Cadillacs. The car is solar-powered and it is urban footprintless. They designed the technology themselves. You would hear the old-school jams like Patti LaBelle and Anita Baker. You would hear Sweet Honey in the Rock harmonizing on We Who Believe in Freedom Will Not Rest, bumping out of those speakers. And if you're up to mischief, they will pick you up swiftly in their sweet ride and look at you until you catch shame and you look down, and they will tell you which way you should be going next. And there are no precincts, just love temples. Spaces to meditate, eat delicious food, mangoes, blueberries, nectarines, okra, pecan pie, fried plantain, things that make your mouth water and your soul alive. All the children expect love, and the grandmothers will help you with your homework, practice yoga with you, teach you how to make jambalaya and coconut cake from scratch. When you're sleepy, they'll start humming and rub your back while you drift off. They remember what it was like when they were your age. The grandmas will take your hand, lead you to their gardens, where you can lay down amongst their flowers, grasses, roses, dahlias, irises, collards, kale, eggplant. They want you to know that you are safe and protected, universal, limitless, sacred, divine, free. Grandma is the original warrior. While since birth, loving fiercely, she has fought so that you don't have to, at least not in the same ways. So give the police departments to the grandmas. They're fearless, they're classy, actualized, blossomed with love. They wear what they want and they say what they please, believe that. And at night, they'll park their cars in a circle so all can sit in them with the sunroofs down and look at the stars and think of what to plant tomorrow based on the moon's mood. They see the pain in your bravado, the confusion in your anger, the depth behind our coldness. They know what oppression has done to our souls, and they'll try to change it one love temple at a time because they have no fear. So for all the mothers moving to music not yet written, and for all those and all of us who create and need spaces like love temples of hope, places where we feed people and souls and find strength for the journey in this hard world to build some new way, may we stay curious for what we are yet to know, and may we begin to move to some music that is yet to be written. We're going to collect our offering as Joe and Rose provide some music for us. I invite you, as you're comfortable, to join a hand next to you or place your hand over your heart and breathe deep the breath of life. On this Mother's Day, these words of benediction come from Alice Walker. My mother adorned with flowers whatever shabby house we were forced to live in. She planted ambitious gardens with over 50 varieties of plants that bloomed profusely. Because of her creativity of flowers, even my memories of poverty are seen through a screen of blooms, sunflowers, petunias, roses, and on and on. I notice that it is only when my mother is working in her flowers she is radiant, almost to the point of being invisible except as creator. She's doing the work her soul must have, ordering the universe in her image of beauty. Guided by my heritage of a love of beauty and respect for strength, in search for my mother's gardens, I found my own. Amen.